Kiddushin Daf Beis is divided in half by a Mishnah. The first half of the daf concludes the discussion of the halachos of Eved Ivri with three sugyas. The discussion of when an Eved Ivri can extend, at what point can he be a nirtza, some restrictions on him being a nirtza, how you make the hole in his ear, and how the hole applies to the doorway. And we'll end off with some Magadata explaining why you have the hole in the ear and the hole in the doorway. Then the Mishnah will introduce the halachos of Eved Kanani, and the Gemara will go through the various different kinyanim that exist and whether they apply to an Eved Kanani or not. So let's begin. The Gemara quotes Brisa discussing when you can have a nirtza, when an Eved Ivri who finished his term of 6 years, when can he extend? The Gemara learns from the pasuk describing what he says two halachos. It says Im Amur Yomar, uses a double lashon of speaking. Says the Gemara, one halacha you see from there is that he has to say twice. If he only says once that he wants to continue, he says he loves it here and he wants to stay. If he only says that once, that's no good. He has to say it twice. Now, besides for that, if saying it twice could have been both at the end of his 6 years or both at the beginning of the 6 years. Besides for that, the Gemara says, the Brisa says there's another halacha. Once it has to be said at least once at the beginning of the 6 years and at least once at the end of the 6 years. And the Brisa gives a source for that. It has to be said at the beginning of the 6 years because if it was only said at the end, then he's not an Eved anymore, and it says Amor Yemar HaEved. He has to still be an Eved. The Gemara will question that. Hold on. Now, he has to say it at the end also. It's not enough if he just says it at the beginning of the term of 6 years, because the pasuk says he has to say Lo Eitzei Chavshi, I don't want to go free. So he has to be speaking at the end and saying I don't want to go free now. So the Gemara has two kashas. The Gemara says, first of all, what do you mean to say that if he says it at the end he's not an Eved anymore? Maybe he says it at the end while he's still an Eved. Why is that a problem? Second of all, what do you mean that he has to say it at the end, because it's not enough to say it at the beginning, because he has to say Lo Eitzei Chavshi? Why don't you say he has to say it at the end? It's not enough to say it at the beginning, because he has to say I love my wife, the Shifcha Kananas that was given to him, and the children that were born for her. He can't say that before, at the beginning of the term of service, because he doesn't have them yet. So the Gemara therefore reinterprets and says the beginning and the end, it doesn't mean the beginning of the 6 years, the end of the 6 years. It means the beginning of the end of the last moment of service. The last moment the Gemara defines as the last pruta's worth of service, which is a term. It takes some time to earn that pruta's worth. So if he says once he's already begun that, so he can no longer be considered an Eved, because he's already he's in the completion stage of his final thing. He's not an Eved anymore. And therefore, that would not qualify as the Eved is saying it, so we know he has to say before that. And also, at that point, there's no problem of him saying that he can't say that he loves his wife. He definitely has his wife already. He could say that, but he has to be ready to go out. He has to be ready leaving, so that he has to be able to say, I'm ready to go, but I don't want to go. So therefore, at the beginning, at the end of that moment, that's the two times that he needs to say this halacha. Okay, that's the Gemara's first brisa. Now the Gemara goes into another brisa discussing four halachas which have to exist for both the Eved and the master in order for him to be able to extend. First, they both have to have a wife and children. The Eved has to have one because he has to be able to say Ahavti esedani is ishti vezbanai. I love my wife and my children. He has to have it. The master also has to have, because the Eved also has to be able to say, because the pasuk says that ki tov le'imach u beisecha, for you and your household. That means that there has to be a wife and children to the master as well, that he loves as well. Next, the Eved has to love the master, and the master has to love the Eved as well. Why? Because it says ki ahevecha ahavti, and it says ki tov le'imach. And it's not imach, it's not with you, it's not good for him, and it's not good for him with you if you, meaning the master, don't love him as well. Next, they both have to be healthy. It has to be tovlei, it has to be good for him. If he's sick, it's not tovlei. And the master also has to be healthy because it has to be imach, it has to be good with you. He has to be healthy as well. The Gemara ends off with the Shaila, what if they're both sick? Could we say that it's imach? It's not really tovlei, but it's imach. So it's tovlei imach, it's as good as it is for me as it is for you? Or do you say, no, it doesn't count as tovlei? The Gemara leaves it as a teku question stands, it's not answered. The Gemara now continues with more brisas, bringing additional halachas. So it brings one which we've seen before. It says ki tovlei imach, it's good for him with you. This teaches us imach b'machal imach hamishta, it has to be good for him with you both in food and in drink. If you cannot be eating fine bread and he's eating coarse bread, you can't be drinking aged wine and he's drinking grape juice, you can't be sleeping on mattresses and he's sleeping on straw. You have to make sure that he has, if there's only one, he has to get the preferred one. And from this we learn, anybody who purchases an Eved Ivri, it is as if he has bought a master for himself, because he has to give him all these things. Next brisa teaches that you also have to support his children and his wife. So Brisa says, "V'yatsa me'imachu banav imai," that he leaves the Yovel, him and his children with him. Now, what children is this referring to? It's not referring to the children of a Shefcha Kananis, because those don't leave; those stay behind. So if Shimon says, "What are these children?" It's referring to the fact that the master has to support and feed his children from his Yisraelis wife. Same thing you say that he has to support and feed his wife, because it says V'yatsa ishta imai, his wife goes out with him, and again Rav Shimon says this is not referring to Shefcha Kananis, it has to be referring to his Yisraelis wife. Now, therefore we have a pasuk that teaches me both the children that he had preceding his avdos have to be supported by the adain and his wife. Why do you have to say both of them? Somewhere says the Kiddushin Daf. If you would have only said the children need to be supported, that might be because children can't work and therefore they're unable to support themselves. But perhaps the wife, you would tell her to go work. Therefore, the Kiddush, we have to say even the wife. And if only said the wife, that would be because she can't collect. She's not appropriate for a woman to go knocking on doors asking for charity. But the children that they are able to do that, perhaps he would say that they should go collect. Now the Gemara concise that moves on to the halachos of how you actually make the whole. So we have two psukim referring to that. There's one that says v'yigisha adainav el like him v'yigisha el hadelas elam mezuzah v'ratza adainav es oznei b'martzei v'avodei lo'elam. This master should bring him to the judges, and they will bring him to the door or to the doorpost and make a hole in his ear. His master should make a hole in his ear with a nail, and he should serve him forever. And the second pasuk says v'lakachtas l'martzei, you should take the nail v'nasata b'oznei v'adalas and place it in his ear and in the door. V'hayalecha eved olam, and he should be a Evid for you forever. Same thing goes for your Amma. So here it says be'oznei uvadelas. Why does it say be'oznei uvadelas in the pasuk? The second one, which is in Devarim. The first one was in Shemais. So why do you have to say be'oznei uvadelas? The u would seem to be extra. So the Gemara says if we would have just said oznei badelas, his ear in the door, you would have thought you don't make a hole in the ear at all. You make a hole in the door in the place at which the area is. Like on the other side was ears leaning on the door on one end, you knock a hole in the door on the other end. So says, how could you say that? The pasuk in Shemais says, so you know that you make a hole in his ear. So says, no, I could have still thought that. What if you make a hole in his ear, nothing to do with the door? And then you go to the door, you put his ear next to the door, you make a hole in the door. So you make a hole separately in his ear and separately in the door, and not the two together. Therefore it says, in one stroke, it goes through the earlobe, or the ear itself, into the door itself. Now, says the Gemara, this door, does it have to be attached? So if would have just said the door, I would have thought it could be attached or it could be lying on the floor. But it says mezuzah, the door post, which has to be standing. If it's not standing, it's not called a door post, it's just called a piece of wood. So therefore, just like the door post has to be standing, the door is also only good as if it's standing up. Now, why is there a hole in the ear? Why is there a hole in the door? So Gemara says, Yochanan ben Zakkai gave a drasha like a chomer, like a bundle of pearls, or like a cluster of perfume. And he said that the reason is that the ear heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu say at Har Sinai, Avadahem, the Klal Yisrael are my servants, not Avadim to Avadim, not servants to other servants, meaning servants to other human beings. This person went and sold himself and purchased another master for himself. His ear needs to have a hole made in it. And Reb Shimon ben Rebbe said the same thing as far as the door. He said the door was present at Mitzrayim at the time that Hashem jumped over, as he passed over, as it were, at Makas B'chores, the door posts that had the blood on it, and he said, avadim, that they are my avadim. I took them out of Mitzrayim as my servants. Why are they going and becoming other servants? The doorway is not bearing proper witness, and therefore the mezuzah, or the door, needs to get a hole made in it as well. Okay, this concludes the halachas of Eved Ivri. Now we begin the next Mishnah, which talks about an Eved Kanani. Now, Eved Kanani means any type of akum, any type of Eved from the nations, not Kanani. Specifically, that's just a term that's used. So how do you acquire an Eved Kanani, and how does he come out of Avdus? How does he free himself? So the Mishnah lists 3 ways. The Gemara will bring a lot more ways and discuss why they are not listed in the Mishnah, whether they work or not. How can you purchase an Eved Kanani? So it says, B'kasav b'shtar u b'chazaka, with money. That is paying money for him, writing a contract of sale, or chazaka, which Gemara explained what that is. Now, how does he reacquire himself? That is to go free. So here you have a machlekes. The Tanakh says through someone else's money or through his own shtar. Now, the problem is that an Eved Kanani doesn't have the ability to own money of his own. Therefore, how could he purchase his way out? He can't redeem himself. So someone else has to redeem him. However, if it's a shtar, he could receive the shtar on his own. If that's what we call a get shichur, he receives the shtar on his own, and then he can go free. That's Tanakama's opinion. Rabbi Meir says the inverse. He says money is his own. That is, somebody else has to give him money, and he gives it to him and on the condition that it belongs to him and not to his master. That's the only way he can own property. Then he takes that money and he can redeem himself. And the shtar has to be done by someone else, and the Gemara will explain why. Okay, so Gemara begins with the sources. How do you know that you can have the kesef? So the Gemara quotes that there is a hekish to the purchase of a field. It says v'snachaltem eisa levnechem acharechem l'reshes achuza. So this is a link to a stay achuza, to a field that is inherited. Just like a field that is inherited can be purchased with kesef, shtar, and chazaka, an eved can also be purchased with kesef, shtar, and chazaka. Now, if you have that linkage, you may think another halacha applies, that an eved should leave his master at Yovel. A stei achuza, a field that's sold, goes back to its original owner at Yovel. To counteract that, the pasuk says, "La'elam behem ta'aveidu," they should serve you forever. There is no freeing at Yovel. Okay, that's the source of these three halachos. Now, we have brises that bring other types of kinyanim, and we'll discuss why they're not mentioned in our Mishnah. So first we have the kinyan of chalipin. Chalipin, as we've seen earlier in the Masechtas, where you transfer one object which symbolically affects the transfer of the other object. So why can't you have a transfer of something else, and that acquires the Eved to its new master through chalipin? So the Brisa mentions that you could do chalipin. Why does our Mishnah not mention it? So the Gemara says our Mishnah is only mentioning kinyanim that don't work by other standard movable objects. Chalipin works by standard movable objects. Kesef, shtar, and chazaka do not. There is no purchase of movable objects by giving money to eraisa. You have to actually do a kinyan on it. Kesef, shtar, and chazaka don't work. Therefore, it didn't mention chalipin because that works by other things. Now the Gemara brings a member of Shmuel that adds another kinyan, and that is Mashicha. Shmuel says you can acquire an Eved through Mashicha. Mashicha is where you pull something towards you. So what qualifies as Mashicha? So if you grab him and pull him, and then he comes towards you because you're pulling him, that's a kinyan Mashicha. Says Shmuel, though, if you call him and he walks towards you, that is not a kinyan Mashicha. Okay, so before we analyze this and how it works, first of all, why is it not mentioned in the Mishnah? Our Mishnah didn't mention that. So our Mishnah, you understand why I didn't mention that, because Mashicha works on metaltalin, and we've already said our Mishnah is not mentioning things which work on metaltalin. However, the other Mishnah, which mentioned chalipin, clearly is mentioning things. The Brisa, that is, which mentioned chalipin, clearly is mentioning things that work on metaltalin. So why does it not mention Mashicha, which works on metaltalin as well? So the Gemara says no, because that Mishnah, that Brisa was only discussing things which work on both metaltalin and karka. Kesef, shtar, and chazaka generally work on land, on karka. Eved Kanani is classed as karka in this regard. Now, Mashicha is something which works only on metaltalin and not on karka, but it does work on an Eved as well, according to Shmuel. So this Brisa is not going to mention it because it's only mentioning things that work on both of them. Okay, now let's get back into the two ways of doing Mashicha. Shmuel said it works if you grab him and you pull him towards you, but if you call him and it comes toward you, it does not work. So this is why not? The Brisa that says that works on an animal. There's a kinyan Mesira. The Brisa lists kinyanim of an animal. So Mesira, if you hand over the animal, if you exchange it from hand to hand. So that means you pass the reins or the leash, or you take hold of its hair or its saddle, or the package that's on its back, the bit which is in its mouth, the bell that's around its neck. These are all Mesira, giving over it. What's Mashicha? Bringing it towards you. So here it says, you call it and it comes to you, or you hit it and it moves because of you. Now, what's the minimum amount it has to move? So Ravasi, some Sirabacha, say that it has to walk the length of its own height. Now, what we see from here, therefore, is we have a kasha. We see that making it move by calling it works as a kinyan for an animal, but does not work for an Eved. Why is it different? It seems to be a contradiction. So our answer is because when an animal walks, it doesn't have its own das, it doesn't have its own understanding, it's not making its own decisions. It's doing what it's doing because of what input the owner has put into it. So if the owner makes it move through his input, that is making it move. It's the owner who's making it move. However, if an Eved walks, he's making his own decision. He's a person. He has a brain. He's making his own decision to walk. Could be he decided to do it because of something that the person told him or called him, but it's still his own decision. So it cannot be called that he came because of someone else. Says Rav Ashi, based on that, if he had an Eved who was a child who does not have his own das, then it is a valid kinyan to call him, and he comes, and that's kinyan Mashiach. Okay, now we go to a kinyan chazaka. So what's chazaka? So the Gemara quotes a brisa. Chazaka is where you have the Eved serve behaving as one's Eved, as one's property. So the brisa gives a list of examples. If he unties his shoe for him, or if he carries his clothing for him to the bathhouse, he undresses him, he washes him, he anoints him, he rubs him, he dresses him, he puts his shoe on, or he lifts him up. Any of these things are a valid kinyan. Says Rav Shimon, chazaka should not be greater than lifting him up. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, we understood everything up till there. What does he mean? Chazaka should not be greater than lifting him up. Lifting him up is a valid kinyan everywhere else. You can be kind of any other object by lifting it up. So the Gemara says, what's going on over here? When you do a kinyan by lifting something up is you are lifting the object, and you are kind of the object by lifting it. Here, you aren't kind of the Eved by lifting him. You're kind of the Eved by him lifting you, because that's an act of service. He's lifting you up. So that act of service, this is the opposite. So what does it mean that shouldn't be great? A chazaka shouldn't be greater than hagbah, which works everywhere else. So the Gemara therefore says you have to insert a line here. The Mishnah or the Brisa lists the Eved picking up the Rabbi as a kinyan, and it implies that if the Rabbi picks him up, that is like a classic kinyan hagbah, where the one who's being kaina lifts the object. That does not work. And the Rishon comments, no, chazaka should not be any better of a kinyan than hagbah. Hagbah works everywhere else. Hagbah works here too. It even works if the owner or the master who's acquiring the Eved lifts him up. Okay, now the Gemara goes deeper into the kinyan hagbah, where the Eved does the service of lifting up the master. So the Gemara says, anytime somebody does a bia with a shechla kananis, it should be kaina, because he is lifted up by being on top of her. So the Gemara says, no. When you have a kinyan hagbah, is where the Eved is exerting himself. He has a exertion, or he has a sense of discomfort from the fact that he's lifting up the master. That's what the chazaka is. The two of them are having a bia, so that's not to both of them. That doesn't count as a chazaka. So Mar says, what about if he does a bia shalei kidarka, where he has ana and she does not? It's an exertion for her. So Mar says, Rav Achai bar Ada says, first of all, who says that there's no hana for a bia shalei kidarka? Quite possible that there is. Second of all, a bia shalei kidarka counts as a bia. In halacha, we always know that it does. The Torah talks about mishkevei, isha, plural types of bia, that they are linked to each other and have the same halachas for all of them. Now the Gemara quotes Rav Yehuda Han Du'a, Rav Yehuda from a place in Kush, which is translated as Hindua. So he says that he had the following incident. There was a convert who has no relatives, and therefore he has no inheritors, and he had an Eved, and he was sick, and he got weak, and Mar Zutra went to visit him, to be mevakar chayla. And while he was there, he saw that he was about to die. Literally, he was momentarily about to happen. So Mar Zutra wanted to be kind of his Eved. So he gave the Eved a job. He said, take my shoe and carry it to my house. That way, the Eved is working for Mar Zutra during the time that his master, the Ger, dies. Since there's no inheritors, the Eved then becomes hefker, and as soon as that happens, instantaneously he's working for Mar Zutra, because he's been carrying his shoe all this time, and therefore Mar Zutra will be kind of him with a kinyan chazaka. Now, obviously Mar Zutra therefore felt that if he wouldn't be kind of him instantly, the Eved would not be kindable, probably because he's kind of himself, because he's hefker, so he's kind of himself. So there's a machlekes when an Eved is kind of himself. If an Eved is a gadol, if he's an adult, we know everyone agrees that he's kind of himself. If he's a katan, it is a machlekes whether he's kind of himself or not. Abishol says that he is not kind of himself. Tanakama says that he is. So what was happening over here? So the Gemara says two ways of learning. Either he was a gadol and everyone agrees that Mar Zutra needed to do this and that's why he did it. Otherwise, the Eved would have been kind of himself. Or he was a katan and Mar Zutra does not hold like Abishol, because he holds that as a katan, he would have been kind of himself, unlike Abishol.